Hey folks, Rob with Two Guys on a Ride, and today, boy oh boy, we're in one of my most dream-worthy locations ever. I have dreamed for years and years of coming to this facility, and finally I'm here. And today we're going to get to speak with one of the folks who's in charge of the museum, and they're going to give us some history. But this is the Auburn Cord Duesenberg Museum in Auburn, Indiana. Stay tuned. Okay folks, so I told you about where I was. It's the Auburn Cord Duesenberg Museum, and today we're with Jonah. And Jonah, what is your official title with the museum?
I am the Director of Marketing and Communications.
Okay, so we got the guy. He knows it all. Well, if he doesn't, I'm going to let him make it up, because who's going to know anyway? But no, really, I want to tell you about this. This is beautiful, absolutely beautiful museum. You can see in the background, I'll step out of the picture, beautiful Art Deco. I don't know what I'm more thrilled about seeing is all the Art Deco touches in this magnificent building, or the cars. I'm leaning toward the cars, and I'm sure that's why you're here as well. So Jonah, give us a little bit of information, number one, about the companies.
Sure. So we're in the corporate headquarters of the Auburn Automobile Company.
Okay.
This building was built in 1930. The Auburn Automobile Company was around well before then, and really at the beginning of the 20th century. The Eckhart family started it as a carriage company, and it kind of lasted through into the 1920s, and then in the 1926, the company was given over to E.L. Cord to take over as Auburn Automobile Company president.
So, you know, I was at the Studebaker Museum the other day, and of course the Studebaker brothers started building wagons, farm wagons and stuff like this. So Auburn was building wagons, and I mean, that's basically, we know that's how the automotive industry came about.
Yep.
They were horseless carriages,
Yes.
and wagons with motors and stuff. So a lot of the folks that we know probably have their roots and their background in building wagons and carriages.
Yeah, it's pretty much the same story as to why the automobile industry is in Detroit. Same reason why there was same sort of seedlings in northern Indiana. It was kind of the right materials as far as lumber and things like that, and the right kind of labor was also here. We had
the Great Lakes to bring materials in on.
Yes.
You had a great location.
And we also had like a lot of craftspeople coming from Europe at that time, from, you know, that were working on the canals and railroads and things like that, and their, you know, their families also began, you know, started carriage companies here, because that's what they did oftentimes when they were, families were in Germany or Ireland or the other places of the folks that settled in this area.
Okay, so, well, that's a little bit about how the Auburn automobile company started,
Yes.
but there's two others here. There's also Cord and Duesenberg. Now you alluded a little bit to Cord. You said E.L. Cord came in to run the company.
Yep, he came in and ran in the 1920s. He's the one that was kind of the visionary behind the building that we're in now. But yes, he started he kept the Auburn line, and he really revolutionized it. And then he also started the Cord line of automobiles under the Auburn Automobile Company, and then the Duesenberg line. And each one was he really envisioned a escalating level of elegance and with each line.
So in the line then, so there was it's hard to say good, better, best. They're all magnificent, but there was a tier in the
Sure.
Auburn
I
Cord
mean,
Duesenberg?
and of course, Duesenbergs were extraordinarily expensive for their time.
I see that one over there was the early 30s, and it
Yes.
was at that time $16,500,
Yes.
which would be a $600,000-700,000 in today's
Yes,
money. My gosh!
So that was very much the Duesenberg at the one end of the spectrum as far as elegance and just the amount, just how expensive it was. That would have been on the Rolls Royce side of things and everything.
Right.
Then you have the Cord, which was not a little bit more affordable, but not as affordable as say the Auburn, which still was expensive for its time. But most of the Auburns went between around $1,200 or so for its time.
So you had a company that went it went from 1,200 to 16,000.
Yes.
So it's akin to maybe. Well, it is kind of. I think Rolls-Royce is owned by which one is owned by Volkswagen Corporation now. So it is kind of the same.
Yes,
you
exactly.
can go from the high all the way down to the people's car. Basically.
Sure, and I mean, and the people who owned, of course, the Duesenbergs were the titans of industry at the time, celebrities. James Cagney was a big fan of them, and so it was definitely. It was, and also that was part of how the company marketed these automobiles.
Oh, sure.
Well,
as I was walking through yesterday, and I was up in the advertising offices reading some of the information, that they really, E.L. Cord really put a lot of emphasis on advertising, and they did there was a white parade or
the white caravan.
The white caravan, where was all the white vehicles, everyone dressed in white. So it was he ahead of his time in that aspect as well for advertising?
Sure. I mean, the man was a serial entrepreneur. He was a salesperson first and foremost. So the reason why he was brought into the company was to sell more automobiles.
Well, that's it. I know we're kind of segueing into it, but I did want to get into the point to where we talk about. Give us a little more history on who E.L. Cord was and how he came to eventually own.
Yeah, so E.L. Cord was he was a salesperson. He was a serial entrepreneur who was very much, he saw kind of waves of innovation in the early 20th century and got behind those waves of innovation and invested in them, as well as being able to sell cars and, eventually television and radio and all these other things that he was kind of a part of. But the investors from Chicago that took over the Auburn Automobile Company needed kind of this figurehead, and they're like, we know of this salesperson that we really think would be a great face.
So he was selling cars.
Yes.
He went from selling the brand Moon cars, to they heard so much about him because I think he sold almost most of the majority of the Moon cars sold in the country at that time. So they heard about this guy and said there must be something going on.
Yeah, I mean, he was a well-known figure in auto shows and things, and where he was just able to move a lot of products.
Wow.
So they kind of, and then once he was here, he very much was kind of wanted to he had a lot of different visions for how the direction of the company should go, and he started putting them into practice right away.
My understanding is when they did hire him, he said, "Okay, I'll come to work, but I want a pathway to ownership."
Yes.
Wow.
Yeah. He's one of those folks who is very forward thinking, and as far as thinking about stock options, controlling stakes as opposed to necessarily just a salary.
Well, because at that time, I mean, there was probably hundreds, if not thousands, of people all throughout the country making automobiles.
Oh, yeah.
And almost like, especially every place in the Midwest, it seems like they had their own car company. St. Cloud, Minnesota had the Pan car, the Pan Towner show they still have.
Yep.
It seems like everywhere I go, you've got the Mitchell here, you have the Marmon, of course, the Studebaker. Maybe some of these brands no one's ever heard of them, but it seemed like at one point, I think somebody told me a couple years ago, I forget the number now, but there were so many thousands of car makers in the United States.
Oh, yeah.
So for him to come down here and try to do something like that with the intention, I mean, we call it a little cocky now, but that's okay. But he had the intention of understanding that that if he could have stock ownership, because he knew he was going to build something here,
Oh,
and it
yeah.
was going to be successful.
Oh yeah, no, it's exactly what he did. And he also kind of had the vision that even though we're in little Auburn, Indiana,
Right.
that it was going to have a worldwide reach, and that's why he focused so much on overseas, sales, and was really kind of one of the few people with these size company that the Auburn Automobile Company was that put so much emphasis on that.
Wow. So yeah, he was quite a visionary, and at some point he owned Checker
He
Cabs.
owned Checker Cab.
Was one of the original investors, or one of the airline companies that developed into American Airlines, or how
Yeah,
was that?
yeah. So the Stinson, actually, we have a Stinson
Right.
airplane
Yep.
in here, and yes, he was owned a majority in that. He had a lot of different things. He was a transportation mogul. I mean, he
And
also
information, you were telling me earlier, radio.
radio. He got on that. He got on TV eventually. I mean, there was lots of different ways in which he invested his money on new technologies that he saw as paving the way for the future of what eventually would be like what we think of the 20th century.
And then eventually out to politics. I think he was a state representative or state senator out in
Nevada.
Nevada.
Yeah.
It's funny because, we've had a lot of politicians follow that. They become movie stars
Yes.
or titans or whatever, and then they go off to politics. But
Yes.
it was interesting that he was just on the state level. So, it probably goes along with the story. Maybe there was a little bit of modesty in him.
Yes.
You wouldn't look at his cars and think there was, because they were so opulent.
No.
But it's just it's amazing. Okay, now we moved over to what I think, it's really tough, but what I think is the most incredible car in the whole building and on the grounds. Again, that's a really tough decision to make, but there's something hauntingly beautiful to me about this vehicle. And tell us about this. Wow.
I mean, it's the first. I mean, it's really, it is. I mean, it was, brought in. It was, originally owned by the Castle family. It was in Hawaii. I mean, it's just, there's a lot of history within this car as to
it
like.
made a couple trips to Hawaii
Yes,
back, I understand.
Yes, it was, I believe they were originally missionaries, and then they became plantation owners and all
Okay.
these other things.
But now this was the very first, this one that's
yes.
sitting here that is within a few feet, and you will tackle me if I go to touch it. I get that. But it is the very first vehicle titled as a Duesenberg.
Exactly, and we're very, very lucky to have it.
I understand the Smithsonian wanted it.
Oh yeah, I mean, I think there was a lot of folks once we realized, once I think, realized how important it was to the story here.
Yeah.
It was the wonderful leadership here at the museum was able, I think, to make our case very well, elegantly and succinctly as to why we deserve this car.
I agree, because I get the Smithsonian wants to do it, but to have it back home,
Yes.
where it started, tells a much deeper rooted story than having it one of many other artifacts
Oh yeah.
in the Smithsonian. Smithsonian is wonderful, but this baby belongs here.
Yes, I mean, and it doesn't mean that it's any less of a national treasure, of course.
Oh, yeah. Exactly.
It's been in many different car show, a different Concours and everything, and that's very much the effect that we have on the folks who come and visit it.
Right. And in just a little bit, we're going to take it out for a drive. I wanted to see your reaction on that. No, we're not. I wish we could. I wish we could even take it outside in the light so I could just walk around it and get to enjoy all of the lines and theme of that vehicle. But it is so unique because, again, this is what year is this? It's a 21?
So it's 21, yeah.
It's a 1921. But if you'll know, we've got pictures we'll overlay here and video. There are no vent louvers on the side of the engine cowl. All the cars at that time as well also had full-length running boards. This has a step that admittedly looks out of place on this vehicle.
Mm-hmm. It sure does.
But I'm sure it's a step in. So I know he was taller, but if his wife was probably could have been 5 foot, 5'2" maybe, or a kid want to get in and take a ride, they needed a way to get in and out of the car. Now understand a little bit more of the history on this vehicle. At one time, the family didn't really appreciate what they had. Didn't it used to haul wood or haul hay or something?
All those things. I mean, again, with a plantation, you have to find more of a use for it for other things. That's. But that's often the case. There's lots. I mean, we have a couple different beautiful, beautiful cars that have been restored that we, and you hear the stories about them. They were in a barn for years and years out of disuse, but before that they had this other thing, where it was like a second they have a big back seat. You can put that to use.
But at the time, just like we look at all the muscle cars and all the ones that are going at Barrett Jackson and Mecum for millions of dollars, they were just cars that rolled off the assembly line that you paid $3,500 for.
Yes.
Brand new in 1969, 1970. It was just a car. This was just a car. It didn't mean anything then. However, I know I was speaking to a gentleman here earlier, you don't like to quote values, and I can't even imagine what the value would be on this. And to tell me that at one point they hauled wood and hay in it, I'm thinking, what were you thinking? But again, it was just a car.
Yeah, I mean, it's just...
It wasn't even that, it was just transportation.
I mean, we have the benefits of being able to look back at the history and knowing how important what that impact is.
Right.
But when it's very much the present of some, they're thinking about how they're going to be able to get one more use out of it that is, beneficial to what the task at hand.
No one's sitting there thinking, oh, this is the first one we ever made. We're going to put it away in 100 years. Somebody's going to appreciate it.
Yes.
No, we don't. 102 years.
Yeah.
You don't think that way.
No.
And I look at a lot of these cars, and you think when they came down the assembly line or sitting and when they were hand built, what would those workers think today?
Yeah.
That were 25, 30 years old at that time or older, these craftsmen who could come back and walk through this museum and see things that they had laid their hands on and know that it became appreciated and know that it still survived. That blows my mind.
Well, and it's wonderful because sometimes we have the family of those folks coming through here, and they tell us, about like how
granddad
or like he had a picture of a car that looked just like this, but so that like just like everybody, they had their favorites, and they had and then but there's other times too you think like probably 90% of the time it was a job for them.
Okay. Wow. Now there's a couple other special cars here that I'd like to take a look at. I think one is back in the area back here where it talks more about E.L. Cord.
Sure.
And then there was another one that's upstairs. It's the Collier's vehicle. And we'll talk a little bit more about that as well. If you got time and if you folks will stay with us. All right. So tell me what we're looking at here other than a car that seems to go on for a mile.
Sure. I mean, it's a beautiful example of a Duesenberg. It's a Murphy body, and it's it's one of the most beautiful cars that we have in the museum, I would say.
I got to say, after the one we just looked at, the Castle, the original Duesenberg, this to me would be it too. But like I was telling you as we walked up to it, one of the amazing things about this, it's a two-seater with a rumble seat, but it is huge. It's probably even larger than a limo would have been at that time.
Oh yeah, it's one of those things where it's like when we do rarely, get the opportunity to take these cars out, it's like it's so hard to kind of like thinking with our experience, the reference point being modern vehicles.
Right.
It's like, when do we start making a turn?
Is it like turning a city bus? It's about that. You start turning, and about 10 to 5 minutes later, you look, and the tail end's finally coming around the corner.
I mean, you see brake lights. You're gonna anywhere you're gonna start hitting it.
Well, if you're like a lot of friends of mine that have nice cars as well and collections of stuff, they're more worried about driving it from all the people that are surrounding them, oogling them as they're driving it for fear they're not going to pay attention and create accidents, or worse yet, run into the car themselves.
Something that's kind of interesting about Auburn that I've learned since I started working here is that you can take a car like this beautiful 31 Duesenberg out on the street, and you may get some smiles and honks, but you wouldn't be creating as much of a spectacle as you think you are because so many people in town have Auburn.
Oh, sure. Well, it's location. I mean, you go to somewhere else in the country, people are going to be like, "Oh my God, what is that car?" It's absolute. And this with the black and the burgundy and all that chrome. Oh my gosh. Now tell me a little bit about something here. And we saw it up in the front showroom up there, but there was a chassis. So when you bought a Duesenberg, you basically bought the chassis, and then you would work with a coach builder, or Duesenberg and Auburn Cord worked with coach builders. So there's a lot of math involved in building automobiles. So they need to know the axle to cowl length and all this other stuff to go. So basically then they could recommend a coach builder, but you didn't just walk in and drive the car off the showroom.
No, it was a process. And that's one of the reasons why also so many of our the cars may be distinct from one to the other, it's because maybe that owner put some little embellishment or something like that, you know.
Right, right.
You know, and that's why, you know, it's, and it could be something as simple as a foot ornament. Maybe it's different. There's one upstairs, you know, it's an Auburn that has, you know, it's a Freemason one because it wanted to kind of show off the fact. So like that allowed a little bit more flexibility than you see nowadays.
So everyone's car was bespoke. It was their car.
Yes.
You could take and go in, I guess, and say, I want do just like my neighbors.
Exactly.
I like what they have, I like everything about it, do it. But maybe change this and still now, but now, you know, it's all mass produced and it's all, you get what you get. And yeah, it is what it is.
But, you know, that's one of the reasons why we, you know, when we get some of these cars that have these wonderful idiosyncratic features, you know, that we're like, huh? You know, like, I think it's one that we had a loan for a while from the Stall collection, you know, had like basically a little bar, like a little flip bar inside of where you could have.
So in doing that then, and when we talk about restoration and restoring these, and I know you guys have archives and stuff like this, but how hard is it when you find one of these that hasn't been restored and you decide to bring it back? I noticed you guys have an original one out, all original, never been touched out there as well. But if someone, say, was just very derelict and you wanted to bring it back to something as beautiful as this, it must be hard, being that they were bespoke. Or did Duesenberg and the bodybuilders keep that much meticulous records?
Yes, I mean, it's a little bit of both. That you get lucky where you get people with the records, or you get what, you know, like here we have our conservation center, a wonderful group of volunteers where their whole job is to kind of you know, reverse engineer some of the things to try to figure out those kind of, it's putting a puzzle together, really.
Right, right, yeah, 100-year-old puzzle, and you're hoping no one's lost a piece. You got the box, but you don't even know if all the pieces are there.
You know, sometimes you get stuff that's like almost, you know, 99% done, but it's that 1% that's been stumping, you know, restorers, and then, or you get something that's like, you know, which we have a couple of a multi-year restoration process, where it's going to be a long process to figure out how to put it back together, you know, how to put Humpty Dumpty back together again.
Well, then now tell me this, because these are all beautiful Concord level cars, and I know they get judged at Pebble Beach and Amelia Island and other Concords like that. How do judges judge them if they were bespoke?
Well, that's, you know, to give you the honest answer, I honestly don't know, because that's one of the areas where I haven't really been a part of that.
I just imagine that probably makes their job way, or they have, and I know they have judges per classes and stuff, so they may have people then that come in that understand that that automobile, and they can judge, you know, on 99.9% of the things that they know, and then they have that little bit of fudge area for, well, it was bespoke, so I can't 1,000% say that was or wasn't there originally. But if it's period and they can validate that, that is something that we know would have been made, then they can accept it.
Exactly.
So, okay, wow, it's amazing. Now, there is another vehicle we're going to take a look at, and it's got quite a cool history to it. I think it was over in Europe, climbing some mountains or whatnot. All right, well, let's go take a look at that one. Okay, now we're in a really cool area. Tell me just real quick before we talk about the car, what's the area of the museum you've got sectioned off here?
So this is our gallery of racers, and you know, because it's show off the fact that, you know, racing and Auburn Cord and Duesenberg share a very linked history with each other. You know, the Duesenberg brothers started out, you know, making race engines. Cord raced.
Well, his edict to make a beautiful and fast. I mean, come on. Then that means racing. I heard a joke years ago. It said, you know, someone asked, they said, when did racing begin? It said the day the day the second car was ever invented. That's the day racing began, because now they wanted to see who was faster. But this is a great heritage of racing with the Auburn Cord Duesenberg. So you've got a whole area dedicated to that, and I got to tell you, folks, these vehicles are magnificent, but none more than this one right here that we're going to look at. Tell us about this one.
It's the 32 Auburn. As you talked about it, you know, the Courier brothers kind of took this all over the place. It raced in, you know, much smaller cars all over Europe, you know, for endurance runs, things along those lines. It was specially outfitted with the cooling, with the copper coil.
Yeah, this is not a hood ornament, folks. Well, I guess it was part of but it was actually for the cooling of the vehicle.
Yep, it was, nicknamed Beelzebub.
Yeah,
It was,
what?
you know, it
Any
was,
idea why?
well, you know, Beelzebub is the demon, is one of
Yeah.
the kings of hell. I mean, I think
Yeah.
it just was fast and mean. You know, it's one of my
Or they
favorite.
just had a cool sense of
Oh
humor.
yeah, very much that could be as well. But you know, it's one of these. It's just one of these vehicles that, like, every time you see it, you kind of have to stop and stare at it.
Yeah.
It's one of my favorite vehicles in the whole collection because I get something different out of it every single time. You know, it's whether, you know, it's like how the leather straps, you know, like why were they put on the way they were to keep the hood down?
Sure.
And then you're thinking about, you know, how did that work in racing and making, you know, because that could very well have been a hazard that they had to deal with, was
Right.
hoods popping up.
Right. Yeah. Well, you got to think, again, when they're racing this, we don't have and this is Europe, they didn't have the highway system. They didn't have the road system. What I'm thinking about with the road system is this is a huge car.
Yes.
And when I look, and even today, and I see feature films of Europe and stuff with different car companies, car people that go through and do shows in Europe, those lanes are super narrow. This would have been huge in Europe.
It was huge, but it was fast. I mean, that was really what it, you know.
So you were big, but you could get out of the way really quick.
Yes, exactly. And, you know, it was kind of designed, you know, to go do that. I mean, even the little things like the little windshields, I mean, that's just provides probably minimal protection, but it was enough to kind of make it so that, you know, there wasn't as much drag as there would have been if there was a full windshield on.
Right, true. And again, what they were doing was racing up and down mountains and things, so it was built for speed. And there again, there you go with the straps on the hood, because you certainly can't see through your tiny windshields if your hood is sitting there flapping like a seagull, you know.
Yeah.
So all of that, but it's just. Now, what kind of, do you know what kind of horsepower this would have had at that time?
I can tell you right now.
Right
so,
over here?
yeah, according to the sign, it had 160 at 3,500 RPM. So.
Okay, 160 horsepower. That's a lot of weight there, too, though.
Yes.
But it's all in perspective. At that time, it was a fast car.
Oh, yeah.
Still.
You know, it was, you know, all throughout, really, I mean, it probably was like, you know, really the pre-war Europe and everything that it was going through, because it was, you know, that was where I think a lot of the racing happened, and you got to kind of think about that in perspective too. It's like, you know, that, you know, also, you know, not just was technology changing the world and, you know, in cars and everything were changing in Europe, but, you know, actual geopolitical lines were changing at that time.
Yeah, exactly. Exactly. So to see something like this preserved is amazing. We have a picture on the back wall there that shows the vehicle with its racing lineage and stuff with its number, and I guess that's the Collier brothers there that raced it. But it's amazing that something like this has been preserved. But you've got fine examples of these vehicles all throughout the museum here. And the museum is absolutely spectacular to come and see and to tour. Okay, so we've come to the end of our video. Before we go, Jonah, why don't you tell us, how can folks find this magnificent museum?
Well, if you want to find out, you know, driving directions, things like that, I would definitely send you to our website, which is automobilemuseum.org. We are in downtown Auburn, Indiana, 1600 South Wayne Street. And then you can find us on social media. Just search the Auburn Cord Duesenberg Automobile Museum, and you'll find us there. And we post regularly on Facebook and Instagram.
Awesome. You know, folks, this is a dream come true for me. I don't know how many times I've walked through a car museum, and I don't think all silently. If anyone were standing beside me, they would have heard me. I've gone through each vehicle, and I've been like, wow, wow. I think I've said that 1,000 times since I've been here. You know, Jonah, thank you so much for your time today. Thank you for sharing a little bit of this beautiful museum. We didn't want to give you the whole story because you kind of come here and see it for yourself. It is definitely worth the trip. Boy, oh boy, thank you so much for your time. I certainly appreciate it. And folks, come on down. Thanks for watching.